Hello and welcome. Who has the correct interpretation of Islam and who's got it wrong? That's a tough and controversial debate right there, along with the argument over who speaks for Islam. Well, Islam is meant to be a personal religion, a relationship between an individual and God. With no one central living authority figure and so many groups and individuals claiming to represent the true Islam, who do you listen to? It's increasingly becoming an issue in Western nations where some argue that Muslim communities, and particularly young, disaffected Muslims, are susceptible to becoming radical in their beliefs. On today's show, we have a wide-ranging discussion with Sheikh Hamza Yusuf and ask who's responsible for a faith with more than 1 billion followers. And don't forget, we take your phone calls and mobile phone texts on this program, and the numbers are at the bottom of your screen right now. Joining us from San Francisco is Sheikh Hamza Yusuf. He's the founder and chairman of the Zaytuna Institute based in California. Sheikh Hamza, welcome.
Thank you.
I have to start off by asking you, you're quoted as saying, Islam is in a mess. What is it in particular that's bothering you the most?
Well, I think a lot of people have been calling for this Islamic Reformation, but in a lot of ways this is exactly what's happening. A lot of the problem is caused by the fact that we don't have a classical or traditional understanding being presented.
Now, you ask for people to return to their true faith, so who defines what is the true faith?
Well, I think every religion has a normative tradition. If we're going to talk about Christianity, there is a normative Christianity. There are certain parameters within Christianity that are accepted by everybody, and then you're going to have your varied interpretations. And the same is true for Islam. One of the most important elements in Islam is the sovereignty of the Quran, and then what are known as mutawatir hadith. The Prophet Muhammad, for instance, in a hadith that has the same level of authority as the Quran, said that there can be no killing of women and children. And so that should be something that is understood by every Muslim, for instance.
So Sheikh Hamza, how do you get around those, with extreme views, extremist views, who believe they have the right faith? They will argue, of course, that they have the right interpretation.
Well, I think one of the major problems that we're dealing with today is because of the extreme circumstances that are out there in the world, we're getting extreme reactions to the world itself. There's an incredible amount of disarray. The so-called meta-narratives, if you want to use a postmodern term, the meta-narratives are breaking down. They're breaking down in the West. They're having a difficult time holding ground in the East also. And so in this type of disarray that you find, intellectual, spiritual, economic, I think you're having a lot of people having a difficult time navigating that, and you're always going to have a small group of people that will react violently to those situations. What is very different today than in the past is that an individual can do the damage of armies of the past. So that's where there's a new variable in this equation that's quite terrifying and troubling for all of us.
Well, I know you're confident speaking your mind, and I want to quote something you said when you commented about how oppressive you think some Muslim countries are. And you say, "I would rather live as a Muslim in the West than in most of the Muslim countries because I think the way Muslims are allowed to live in the West is closer to the Muslim way." So it makes me wonder, in what way is the Muslim life closer in this part in the West?
Well, I think one of the things that's a hallmark certainly of the United States is freedom of religion. The fact that people do have a right to go to churches and synagogues and temples however they see fit, and to worship without having fear of being persecuted for their religious beliefs. In the Muslim countries, if somebody, for instance, from their religious belief begin to articulate criticisms of the government, for instance, those people can disappear or be arrested, be persecuted because they're voicing moral objections to the status quo. And so another aspect I think that a lot of people in the West have no idea is that the failed states of many of the Muslim countries, and the fact that the right to redress wrongs is very difficult to uphold in places in the Muslim world where you don't have court systems that are functioning. And so people don't have the ability to redress just basic wrongs in their life. The fact that in many of the Muslim countries you have to bribe to get basic rights. It's a very difficult life, and I don't think people in the West quite understand how difficult that is for the average Muslim just to get through a day in one of the major urban centers of the Muslim world.
Well, now, of course, in America in particular, there is the American dream. There is the desire to assimilate among many immigrants and an expectation to assimilate. And I know you take it to another step when you say, and to quote you here again on immigrants, you say, how do you strike the balance? Sorry, you say, I would say to them, immigrants, if they are going to rant and rave about the West, they should emigrate to a Muslim country. The goodwill of these countries to immigrants must be recognized by Muslims. So then it makes me wonder, how do you strike that balance between host countries allowing immigrants to retain their way, the beliefs and the way they live, and that need to assimilate?
Well, first of all, I want to, that quote has a caveat, and that is that quote was specifically talking about very extreme voices in the West. And I was talking about certain voices in London, in fact, that now most of them have either been arrested or sent back to Jordan or other places in the Arab world. So I was talking about specific voices that are very extreme. One of the ironies of some of these people is they were actually on the welfare system, and that at the same time that they were attacking the very state that was feeding them. And so that was my point. In terms of dissent and the right to dissent, that is a fundamental Western right. And so an immigrant who's come to these countries legally, who's living in these countries legally, has every right to criticize the policies of the country. And although I think many of them would hesitate to do that, they still have that right, and they shouldn't be seen as somehow un-American or lacking a sense of Britishness if they do that. So I was specifically talking about really extreme voices out there that actually advocate violence. And I think that's an important point, because so many people, I've been called an extremist, there's so many people out there that use the term extremist. And so I think it's very important that we limit that term to those people that advocate violence, to force other people to do what they want them to do. I think dissent is as American as apple pie, and I would hate to see a country that doesn't not only celebrate dissent, but also listen to those voices and take them seriously, because you have to have dissenting voices. Confucius, the great Chinese sage, says, when everybody says this is good, that is bad. And I think there's an immense amount of truth in that statement.
I thank you for the clarification. It's important we get the right perspective on what you've said there. Now, I want to get a caller in from London. Mohammed's on the line with a question. Mohammed, please go ahead.
Why is it that all the terrorist activities in the Middle East are actually, in a way or another, directly or indirectly sponsored by the Saudis through the Wahhabi sect? And they're actually tarnishing the whole of the Muslim faith. They are perpetrating activities in London, in Spain, in America,
Mohammed,
and they are unchallenged.
Okay, Mohammed, well, I'm not sure this is a question, it's a political question. I mean, Sheikh Hamza, if you're willing to tackle this, obviously some people have strong views about where they feel that the problem lies. I don't know if that's something you want to tackle in particular.
No, that's fine. I can answer that.
Go ahead, please.
I mean, I would say, first of all, I'm definitely not a Wahhabi. I wasn't trained in that school. I don't like Wahhabism, but I have to be fair. And this kind of blanket attack on the Wahhabis as being the source of all evil in the world, I don't buy that kind of black and white cartoon scenario of reality. First of all, people should remember that the Wahhabi ulama have consistently condemned terrorism, suicide bombing. Sheikh bin Baz of Saudi Arabia, years ago, before it was popular, was one of the few voices in the Muslim world that was condemning terrorism, and particularly suicide bombing, irrespective of where it was, because many of the scholars, I think, waffle on this issue, and they'll be against suicide bombing, for instance, in America or in Great Britain. They'll condemn 7/7 or 9/11, but they won't condemn suicide bombing in Palestine, whereas the Saudi ulama have consistently opposed that. So I don't think it's fair to do that. The problem with Wahhabism is when you get a political revolutionary ideology combined with Wahhabism, that's a quite frightening partnership there. And I think that's what's happened. But a lot of these so-called Wahhabis that are out there doing whatever nefarious deeds they're doing, these people are actually anathematized by the Saudi scholars. And I think the Saudi government has consistently been against terrorism. I mean, I don't like the brand of Islam particularly that they're spreading, but you have to be fair to people.
Well, I have to get a question to you from Nairobi in Kenya. Muhammad Nyamwanda says, What should Muslims do to get rid of unjust leaders in the Muslim world? This is following up on your comment that many parts of the Muslim world, the countries are not the ideal place to live.
Right. Well, I think if you want a Quranic perspective, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, how you are, so are the people put over you. So there's a lot of onus on the actual people. The Quran says God does not change a people until they change what's in themselves. So I think there needs to be a lot of introspection in the Muslim world. There needs to be a lot of self-criticism, things that we haven't been very adept at of recent times.
Now, you, at the time of September the 11th, soon after, you were seen out with President Bush. You were very visible. You received a lot of condemnation for it, as well as support. And I wonder, looking back on that time now, do you feel you made the right decision to what seemed to be at least, sort of align yourself politically with the administration in the U.S.?
Well, I mean, first of all, I never aligned myself politically with the administration. I've been against the war since the beginning. The letter that I actually gave to George Bush on September 20th, I said in there that he should do anything but rush into a war that he could come to regret more than we regret the war in Vietnam. So that's what that was my advice to them. So I've been opposed to the war. I've been opposed to a lot of the policies of the administration. I've never aligned myself with the administration, and I think it's sad that I've been tainted in that way. I'm a dissident. And I think it's very important that you have voices constantly that challenge misguided policies and misadventures, both at home and abroad. And that's the voice that I adhere to. And I think it's very important that scholars, intellectuals, academics, that they have that freedom to do that.
I know,
so in terms of, do I regret doing what I did? No, I did what I thought was best at the time, and I would hope that people at least accept that there was good intention behind it.
I was going to say, you actually were, you're saying there was a need for a voice to speak out, and you were actually asked to go to Britain and speak out on the same issues after the 7/7 attacks in Britain. Tony Blair wanted your advice. What advice, apart from what you just told us about what you said to President Bush, what advice did you give Tony Blair, for example, and how much did you find people like President Bush and Prime Minister Tony Blair listen to what you had to say?
Well, I never advised Tony Blair. I've advised people inside the British government, and my advice is generally the same, that if you want to lessen terrorism in the world, then you have to lessen state terrorism. When you have states that bomb people, you're going to have people that are at the brunt of those bombs. They're going to be very upset. It's as simple as that. People don't like getting their toes stepped on, let alone getting bombed. So I think that's a major problem out there, is that somehow we legitimize state terror and then vigilante terror is demonized and anathematized. So I think it's very important that we recognize that indiscriminate violence, irrespective of whether a state sponsors it or whether individual vigilante groups are the perpetrators, has to be rejected. And I think at the root of a lot of the major problems today is the armaments industry and the fact that Western economies are so dependent upon massive armaments industries that there's constantly a need out there for enemies. And so I just think it's very important that we recognize that there are roots to this, and like Henry David Thoreau said, for every one person hacking away at the roots, there's 100 that are hacking away at the branches. So it's very important that we go to the root cause of these problems.
Let's squeeze in a couple of callers we've got on the line, Sheikh Hamza. We've got Sami on the line from Nigeria. Quick question, please, Sami.
I'm not from Nigeria.
Oh, I'm sorry.
From Liberia.
Liberia. My apologies. Go ahead.
No, I just want to ask Brother Hamza Yusuf if he has any plans into coming to West Africa, especially Liberia, Sierra Leone, Ghana, Nigeria. Of course, I've met him in Jazeera in Brazil once a couple of years ago, and I didn't know that was happening for some of his cassettes when I visited New York about 3 years ago.
Okay. So, Sheikh Hamza,
well, I always say, I'm a West African trapped in a white person's body. I love West Africa. I studied in West Africa, and I certainly do hope that I go back.
All right. We've got Ganga on the line from London with a quick question as well. Ganga, go ahead.
Hello. Assalamu alaikum. And everyone there.
Alaikum assalam.
I'm very proud of, on his statement, he said that we are better Western here than in the what so-called Muslim countries. And what sect is he if he is not a Wahhabi? So is he Sunni or Shia? It is because of that I am a Muslim. I don't have any sect. I'm not Sunni, I'm not Shia, I'm just a Muslim.
Okay.
If we can continue with that, I think we won't have any differences.
Ganga, thank you for your comment. I'm going to just end with a very quick question to Sheikh Hamza as well, because we have less than a minute. It came from Paris, France, an email here, Sheikh Hamza, and it's Latin America had Christian liberation theology, but Muslim countries are still waiting for Islamic liberation theology. Do you think that popular and socially orientated movements like Hezbollah or Hamas are the beginning of a new democratic and more progressive Islam? What's your view?
Personally, I think we need a Muslim stillness rather than a Muslim movement. I think there's too much movement out there. We're living in times of incredible turmoil, and I think people need more quietude in their lives. They need more remembrance of God. And I think that many of the problems that we're facing out there are problems that can only be solved if we join together collectively as a species. I think our problems confronting humanity today are much greater than those problems that separate us as groups and sects and tribes. So I'm much more for cooperation than revolution.
Well, Sheikh Hamza, I thank you very much for being with us. Lots more questions, but not enough time. We hope you'll join us again sometime soon so we can continue our discussion.
All right, Mr. Khan, thank you very much.
My pleasure, sir. And thank you for being with us. On tomorrow's show, we look at internet censorship around the world and how some big-name brands seem to be putting commercial concerns and access to lucrative markets ahead of free speech. Don't forget, if you have any thoughts about this or any other pressing issues around the world, do send your emails to riz@aljazeera.net. We'll see you next time. Street Talk is coming up next.